If you haven't seen my video on the history of the 1st or 2nd decade AD, make sure to check that one out before you start this. The link will be in the description. This is a compilation of the yearly history series on my channel, where we cover the history of the world every year. Let's get started. Starting off with the ongoing rebellion led by Tacfarinas, a deserter of the Roman army who has been at the head of an army of Berber and Musulami fighters. Last year, he set up a base of operations in Mauritania to consolidate his gains and store all of the loot he has taken from North African villages. This year, he sends envoys to Rome to offer peace in return for land for himself and his followers. Most likely, his partisans sought restored access to their traditional grazing grounds, which the Romans now control. Emperor Tiberius is outraged by this offer from a man who he considers a deserter and common brigand. The offer is dismissed, with Tiberius sending Quintus Junius Blasus, a veteran and former governor of Pannonia, to deal with the rebellion, and so the conflict continues on into its 5th year. Back in Rome, the biological son of Emperor Tiberius and heir to the Roman Empire, Drusus, returns to the capital to celebrate a triumph. But has he seen enough success to earn this prestigious accolade, or is this an attempt by Emperor Tiberius to artificially inflate the popularity of his less than popular son? Drusus was able to quell a revolt in Illyricum in the aftermath of the death of Augustus, and even probably had a hand in overthrowing King Maroboduus of the Marcomanni. But in comparison to Germanicus, who received a triumph for defeating Rome's chief rival Arminius multiple times, raided Germanic territory, and gained the return of Rome's lost battle standards, the accomplishments are less than impressive. These celebrations set the stage for Drusus to be named consul for the 2nd time in his life this year. This leaves the ever more disaffected Emperor Tiberius in a position where he believes he can leave Drusus in control of stately matters while he goes on a lengthy vacation to Campania in the countryside. He remains there for the entire year, conducting most of his official business by post. The Romans, led by Julius Caesar, may have conquered Gaul 70 years ago and annexed it as an imperial province, but the Romanization process of the Gallic residents is still not complete. Under Roman rule, Gauls have been subjected to harsh debt collection policies and a per capita provincial tribute. A rebellion begins in Gaul this year as the Aedui people and other Gallic tribes decide to rise up, led by 2 men, Julius Sacrovir and Julius Florus, who are Gallic soldiers of the Roman army. Tacitus lists the reasons for this revolt as indebtedness, the vices of the Roman lifestyle, a desire for liberty, and the recent death of Germanicus. Gaius Silius is the man tasked with dealing with this revolt. Julius Florus eludes the Romans for some time before being defeated in battle and taking his own life to prevent capture. Julius Sacrovir is more successful initially and even takes control of the city of Augusta Dunum, where he recruits more Gauls to his cause. Eventually, Julius Sacrovir and the rebels are beaten after fierce fighting. In their last moments, Sacrovir and his few remaining followers take shelter in a cottage, whereupon they are surrounded and the house is set on fire. Sacrovir chooses suicide with his followers over surrender or burning to death. North of the Roman border, the Romans will not have to worry about their rival Arminius any longer. The charismatic and capable figure is murdered by opponents within his own tribe, who felt he was becoming too powerful. If the Romans were worried about a massive, united Germanic confederation led by a single man, they are now breathing a sigh of relief, as the potential for that scenario is much smaller for the near future. Now, turning to the rebellions in Shandong, the first clash takes place between the official imperial army and rebel forces near the city of Nanyang. The massive imperial army, which Wang Mang had ordered to be amassed over the last couple of years, advances on the rebels and are swept away by the determined Red Eyebrows army. To compound the problems, the constant famines which have been ongoing for over a decade worsen, as the grain prices have spiraled out of control at this time. the desperate population has been resorting to making soup from leaves, grass, and bark from trees. Even in the capital of Chang'an, where Wang Mang is located, a swarm of locusts so large it blots out the sun strikes and even infiltrates the Weiyang Palace. Back to the rebellion. The governor of Jing province mobilizes 20,000 soldiers to attack the Lulin rebels, who are the second largest rebel force after the Red Eyebrows. A battle takes place at Yundu, with the result being a major victory for the rebels, who end up killing thousands of government soldiers and capture their food supply and arms. Wang Mang's political position is in dire straits, but there is great trouble arising in his personal life as well. He discovers that his son, Wang Lin, is having an affair with one of his ladies-in-waiting. Wang Mang feels betrayed and orders Wang Lin to commit suicide by poison, but Lin refuses and kills himself using a sword instead. This leaves Wang An as the only remaining son of Wang Mang and Empress Xiaomu. Later in the year, Wang An, the only remaining heir of the Qin dynasty, falls ill and dies, leaving Wang Mang in a hopeless situation, actively losing control of the Qin dynasty and the mandate of heaven itself, if he hasn't lost that already. Checking in on the kingdom of Goguryeo, northeast of China, which we have seen feuding with the Qin dynasty in the past. They invade the neighboring state of Dongbuyeo. King Daimusin is the third king of Goguryeo and has been on the throne since 18 AD. Dongbuyeo to the east is a much weaker state, and he is looking to take advantage. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Arminius, born around 18 BC in Germania, was a Germanic prince and then chieftain of the Cherusci tribe. As a young man, he was taken to Rome as a hostage, where he received a Roman military education and became a Roman citizen and equestrian. However, he later turned against the Romans, organizing a coalition of Germanic tribes to resist Roman expansion. In 9 AD, Arminius led this alliance to a stunning victory against 3 Roman legions under Publius Quintilius Varus, annihilating them at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. This defeat stunned the Romans and halted efforts to conquer Germania east of the Rhine. He saw some more success in the following years, but eventually, power began to fall from his grasp as jealous tribesmen vied for power of their own through a civil war and later the killing of Arminius. Arminius's legacy endures as a symbol of resistance against Roman imperialism. His victory at Teutoburg changed the course of Roman history and solidified his place as a Germanic folk hero. This year, the Romans are ramping up their attempts to take down the rebel Tacfarinas once and for all. Quintus Junius Blasus, who is tasked by Emperor Tiberius to complete the mission, goes on the attack. He is able to capture Tacfarinas' brother in an ambush and retreats back to Roman territory as the winter begins. Tiberius assumes that this is the end of the rebellion and awards Blasus with the title of Imperator, which is an act that is quite out of the ordinary. Typically, this title is solely granted to members within the imperial family. Speaking of the imperial family, Tiberius moves forward with his efforts to consolidate the future succession of his son and heir, Drusus. A year after his triumph, he is granted Tribunicia Potestas, or tribunician power. Tribune used to be an important office reserved for plebeians during the time of the Roman Republic, to allow them to advance their causes and prevent the noble patricians from abusing their power. Augustus co-opted the title in 23 BC, and it has been held by the imperial family ever since. To begin the year in China, Wang Mang recalls all state monopolies of the Qin dynasty as they are unenforceable during the current situation. These include goods such as liquor, salt, iron implements, and more. Wang Mang had made many quite ambitious reforms to the entire system of the previous Han dynasty which he usurped and made his own, such as sweeping land reforms, abolishing slavery, and nationalizing all stocks of gold in China. Nearly all of his reforms have been rolled back in the time since then, so it is safe to say his attempt to mold China to his Confucian worldview has been a complete failure. On the military front, a desperate Wang Mang orders 2 of his top generals to take down the Red Eyebrows rebels after the utter failure of the Imperial Army in the previous year. As they pass through the capital gate on the way out of Chang'an, they pause to make a sacrifice to the gods of the highways. Rain begins to fall immediately, and the sages declare, quote, "This is because heaven weeps for the army," unquote. The army marches to Shandong during the winter, the season when the waters of the Yellow River are low. The Shin contingent comes into contact with the Red Eyebrows and are defeated. After the victory, the Red Eyebrows army splits, and some members begin to leave Shandong, which has been so utterly ravaged by the ongoing agrarian rebellions that the food and other loot has mostly dried up, and they move into the commandery of Nanyang just to the south. Nanyang is a rich agricultural basin and seems ripe for the picking, although small bands have already been operating in the area. A separate contingent has also entered Nanyang from the south, led by a man named Liu Xuan. These rebels are mostly accepted by the populace of Nanyang, but a portion of the locals take the opportunity to begin their own rebellions, with all of these armies entering their territory. Their leader, Liu Yan, forms an alliance with the army led by Liu Xuan, who's of the same Liu clan. Marching north, Liu Yan's rebel forces find initial success, but is soon defeated by Wang Mang's local army stationed in Nanyang. Liu Yan then regroups by successfully making the case for other rebel leaders to join him, greatly increasing the size of his army. Elsewhere, one of the other large rebel forces, the Lulin rebels, are suddenly afflicted by a serious plague of an unspecified nature, and at least 25,000 men die. This leads to the breakup of the group into 3 forces. One moves west, one travels to the north, and the third joins forces with Liu Yan. We will leave the situation in China right there. Continuing on with King Dai Musin of Goguryeu's invasion of Dongbuyo, the minor state to the east, which started the previous year. This year, Dai Musin has Dongbuyo's king Dai So killed. This results in the annexation of this minor kingdom by Goguryeo, and with that, we end the year. Starting off again with the rebellion against the Roman Empire in North Africa, led by the Berber rebel Tacfarinas. The previous year, the Romans under Quintus Junius Blasus inflicted a serious defeat on the rebel army, even capturing the brother of Tacfarinas. Emperor Tiberius believed this to be the end of the unrest, and this year disbands the rest of his forces tasked with quelling the revolt. Turning to matters in Rome, Tiberius makes the order to throw all actors out of Rome. Although some actors are immensely popular and the spectacles they put on for the Roman people have been a part of many celebrations and general entertainment, they are viewed as very lowly and lacking virtue. They are considered to be on the same social level as prostitutes and not afforded the same rights as other professions, which the Romans see as much more honorable. Tiberius's son, Drusus, has seen a sharp uptick in responsibilities in past years, through his father awarding him a military triumph, naming him consul, and granting him tribunician powers. But in personal matters, he has come to despise the commander of the Praetorian Guard, Sejanus, a man who was rewarded the position by Tiberius himself in 14 AD as one of his first acts as emperor, and he has inserted himself into all levels of politics since then. Thus, Drusus feels he is competing with Sejanus for the ear of his father. The feelings are mutual for Sejanus. He has nothing but disdain for the heir to the empire. Months earlier, tensions ramped up when Sejanus seduced Drusus's wife, Livilla, who had probably grown tired of her husband's constant adultery. The situation culminates with Drusus and Sejanus coming to blows with one another. Additionally, the crafty Sejanus is able to convince Livilla that he has fallen in love with her, even going as far as divorcing his wife to prove his intentions and advance his position. She joins his plot to take out the imperial son, and with her help, Drusus is slowly poisoned and dies from what seems like natural causes. A funeral is held for Drusus, with Tiberius delivering the eulogy to the mourning Senate, who probably begin to realize at this point that Sejanus will now be unrestrained in his ambitions, considering Emperor Tiberius is blind to any ulterior motives the Praetorian prefect may have. Tiberius seems to now find himself in a similar predicament to his predecessor, Augustus, who went through multiple heirs until finally landing on Tiberius, who stuck. Drusus was his only biological son, so now he has to look elsewhere to find his next heir. With that, he turns to the remaining eldest sons of Germanicus, the 17-year-old Nero Julius Caesar, who is wed to Drusus's daughter, Julia Livia, and another boy named Drusus Caesar. Terrifyingly, Sejanus shifts his devious gaze towards these two very green young men who have no idea what is coming for them. From this point forward, Tiberius seems to lose even more interest in the empire and occupies himself solely with the pursuit of pleasure. Even during his eulogy, he stated, quote, "I, however, have sought sterner solace. The arms in which I have taken refuge are those of the Senate," unquote, signaling his intentions that have been coming to the forefront slowly for years after backing away from imperial duties and even residing in the countryside for the entire year of 21 AD, allowing his son to take the lead. Lucius Aelius Sejanus, who seems to have slowly inserted himself into almost every aspect of the imperial administration and is already the commander of the powerful Praetorian Guard, now begins to dominate the Roman Senate and the discontented Tiberius, who looks at him quite affectionately. It is widely viewed by prominent Romans that the shady Sejanus has eyes and ears in every corner of the empire. In approximately this year, the Greek geographer, philosopher, and historian Strabo completes his renowned work Geographica, which presents a descriptive history of people and places from different regions of the world known during his lifetime. Strabo is also known for producing some of the most advanced world maps seen to this date in the ancient world. He's traveled extensively, as he says, quote, "Westward I have journeyed to the parts of Etruria opposite Sardinia, towards the south from the Euxine to the borders of Ethiopia, and perhaps not one of those who have written geographies has visited more places than I have between those limits," unquote. In China, we resume the situation in war-torn Nanyang. Growing rebel armies led by Liu Xuan and Liu Yan have allied with one another. Although the locally stationed imperial forces were able to score a victory against Liu Yan's army, he responded by recruiting even more rebels and is now poised to do some damage. To start this year, Liu Yan's contingent meets the imperial army head-on once again, and this time leaves as the victorious party while killing two of the opposing army's commanders. Liu Yan now controls the greater part of Nanyang, and he begins to besiege its capital, Wuhan. At this point, messengers fan out from Nanyang and spread the word that Emperor Wang Mang should be overthrown and enumerating his supposed crimes. The rebels decide that now is an opportune time to legalize their rebellion and declare their own emperor to topple the ailing Qin dynasty. They come to the decision that the Han dynasty, which Wang Mang had overthrown in 9 AD and lasted for over 200 years beforehand, dominating all of China, should be restored by raising up a member of the Liu clan. The prime candidate is Liu Yan, due to his successes in amassing an army and defeating Wang Mang's forces. The top chieftains, who have joined Liu Yan's cause, decide that him being named emperor would rob them of their influence and believe he would function as a creature of the nobility. They turn their attention to Liu Xuan, another member of the Liu clan and Liu Yan's third cousin, who is at the head of his own smaller army. They expect that if they select him as emperor, they will be able to dominate him. Thus, they make the final decision to raise up Liu Xuan as the new emperor and their candidate to restore the Han dynasty. He is now known as the Gangxi Emperor. Liu Yan argues his case, but his attempts are in vain. The very chieftains and soldiers who joined his cause and followed him, turn their shoulders, and abandon him. The rebellious movements all begin to consolidate around the Gangxi Emperor by the spring, with their chieftains being compensated fairly. At last, the city the Han army has been besieging, Wan, falls to them, and the Gangxi Emperor declares it to be his temporary capital. During these major events, Wang Mang had ordered the mobilization of a great army to match that of the rebels in Nanyang, and sends it out. They advance on the newly titled Han army from Yingchuan, who then retreat to Kunyang as the Imperial Shin forces begin to besiege the city. In the night, the brother of Liu Yan, Liu Xiu, is able to escape undetected and return at the head of a mass of rebel warriors. They then proceed to attack Wang Mang's massive army from two sides and utterly rout them. Wang Mang is now at his breaking point, as word begins to spread about the decisive defeat of the Shin army at Kunyang. Many officials in the capital, Chang'an, begin to plot against him. Some are discovered, and those conspirators are executed or commit suicide. Elsewhere, local administrators in China begin to shift their allegiance to the Gangxi Emperor and the Han Restoration. Additional rebellions break out all across the empire from north to south. In the aftermath of the victory at Kunyang, one of the rebel chieftains brings trumped-up charges on Liu Yan, who still remains a political threat to the Gangxi Emperor and other chieftains. They waste no time and execute him immediately. His brother, Liu Xiu, decides not to protest the unjustified killing of his brother and is rewarded accordingly by the Gangxi Emperor, being promoted to general. The Han army now looks to Chang'an, and it begins its march towards the capital. Wang Mang's last defenses are crumbling. Other clans in the surrounding area look to take advantage of the situation and surround the capital searching for loot. These men break into the city in October and ransack everything they can find. Even residents within the city join these rebels and force their way into the imperial palace. Now the vultures are circling, and at dawn the next day, Wang Mang's supporters take him to a terrace where they make their final stand. They are soon overrun by the rebels, and Wang Mang is killed and beheaded in the flurry of chaos. All of this takes place before the official Han army even arrives at the city. Wang Mang's head is transported to Wan, where it is presented to the Gangxi Emperor and later displayed in the marketplace of the city. Days after, Luoyang, the second largest city in China, falls to the Hans. The Gangxi Emperor decides to make this his new capital. We end this chaotic year in China with most of Wang Mang's officials changing their allegiance to the Gangxi Emperor, and he begins the process of consolidating his rule. Liu Xiu, who is now taking a much more prominent role in the new administration for his loyalty and heroic actions rallying the rebel forces to crush the Great Shin army, is sent on a mission to the northern part of the Great Plain to pacify the region. The Hans may have control of a significant portion of China, but the Red Eyebrows army still remains in Shandong and just reaches east of Luoyang as the year ends, so it is not fair to say that the Han dynasty has truly and officially been restored quite yet. The other rebels don't look to be backing down, so a new chapter of the civil war in China is just beginning. Even in the west, control of Shiyu or the western regions has been lost by now, after years of deterioration of control once held in the region and Wang Mang's incompetence. We will leave the situation right there. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Drusus Julius Caesar, the son of Tiberius and Vipsania Agrippina, was born in Rome in 14 BC. His name at birth was Nero Claudius Drusus, but in 4 AD, he added Julius Caesar to his name following his father's adoption into the Julii by Augustus. Drusus made his entrance into the world of politics in 10 AD, taking the office of quaestor. His career went on to slightly mirror that of his stepbrother Germanicus, who, in the end, may have held similar offices and titles, but far outshone him in popularity and achievements. Near the end of his life, Drusus began to feud with the Praetorian prefect Sejanus, who was accused by Tacitus of being the person that orchestrated his premature death. Wang Mang was born in 45 BC in the Wei Commandery to a family whose origins can be traced back to the kings of Qi during the Warring States period of China. His elder sister, Wang Zhangjun, was consort to Emperor Yuan of the Han Dynasty and remained politically relevant for the rest of her life. Wang Mang slowly accumulated political power during the years of the late 10s BC and early 10s AD through granting himself important political titles, taking advantage of the political weakness of the child emperors, and having his daughter married to Emperor Ping of Han. Eventually, he made his move and dismissed the young emperor Ru Ziying from the throne, taking the title for himself and founding the relatively short-lived Qin dynasty, while also demoting the status of the former Han Dynasty imperial family members. Being greatly inspired by the works of Confucian scholars, he acted immediately to mold imperial China to his worldview by making major reforms. He implemented state monopolies on popular goods, abolished slavery, and announced sweeping land redistribution reforms. Wang Mang found that some of these reforms were such a change from the previous administration that they were unenforceable, and all of the new systems he put in place began to break down immediately after promulgation. Before even getting going in his new role, disaster struck in 11 AD as the Yellow River catastrophically flooded, leading to massive famines across China over the course of the remainder of his emperorship. Bands of agrarian rebels began popping up, as well as more coherent forces eventually, such as the Red Eyebrows, the Lulin rebels, and those led by the members of the Liu clan, which would take power from the corpse of the Qin dynasty in the end. Year over year, the situation worsened, with Wang Mang doing nothing effective to respond. He lost his claim to the mandate of heaven as the population began to realize they were in for a tough time. Every army he sent out to control the situation met the same fate, with the rebel armies only multiplying year after year. By the end, his fate was sealed and there were no options left that he could take to avert the crisis. It showed up right on his doorstep on his last day, and he met an unceremonious fate, losing his head. Wang Mang was a very ambitious and idealistic man who used whichever means he could to gain power. Once he forced his way into becoming Emperor of China, he was slowly faced with the fact that the vision he had for his empire was not to be. He attempted to boldly change the course of history and forge his own dynasty, but once it came to an end, he was the sole member of the Qin dynasty. Liu Xin was a Chinese astronomer, mathematician, and politician during the Han and Qin dynasty eras. For centuries, the Chinese have been using the value of 3 for pi in mathematics, until Liu Xin was able to calculate the value to 3.41547, although his method for this is unknown. Once Wang Mang came to power, he was promoted to the position of Guoshi, or Professor Laureate, a very powerful minister position to help Wang Mang's vision to return China to the lost ways of the ancient sage kings, a golden age of order and peace. Over the course of his work, he aided the Qin bureaucracy to standardize volumes of liquids and other measurements. To kick off the year, the rebellion against the Romans in North Africa, led by Tacfarinas, finally comes to an end. It's been 7 years since the deserter of the Roman army decided to lead a coalition of Berber and Musulamii warriors against the encroaching borders of the empire. Beginning this year, Tacfarinas starts to style himself as a leader of a war of national liberation, which clearly the Romans do not want to hear. The propaganda he uses is highly effective on the Numidian people, and his rebel army swells in size. He is joined by a large number of Morai warriors who turn their back on their young pro-Roman king of Mauritania, Ptolemy, who had recently succeeded his father, Juba II. Emperor Tiberius sends in a new commander this time, Publius Cornelius Dolabella, who he's hoping will crush this bothersome rebellion for good. By the start of this year's campaign season, Tacfarinas feels confident enough to lay siege to the Roman town of Thubursicum. Dolabella rushes his army to the scene and sweeps away Tacfarinas' forces with an effective infantry charge, which causes them to flee west into Mauritania. Now the hunt for Tacfarinas begins. Receiving aid from the young king Ptolemy, Dolabella splits his force into 4 divisions to cover more ground. This tactic is effective, and Tacfarinas is spotted in a camp near the ruins of the fort of Azia. The Romans sneak up on the camp and attack the stunned rebel troops. The result is a massacre at the hands of the vengeful Roman military. Tacfarinas' entourage is surrounded and overwhelmed. Realizing there is no way he could avoid being captured, Tacfarinas impales himself on a spear and dies rather than being humiliated by the Romans. The dreams of the Musulamii tribesmen of being able to regain their traditional grazing grounds from the Romans dies with Tacfarinas. Dolabella immediately begins to impose a tax registration system for the entire plateau. Dolabella also appeals to Tiberius in an attempt to be rewarded with the title of Imperator, but the emperor declines. And with that, Tacfarinas' revolt, which broke out in 17 AD, is now over. At the start of the year in China, the situation resumes after the killing of Wang Mang and the dissolution of the Qin dynasty. The Gangxi emperor's first action is to move his capital from Luoyang to Chang'an, where the previous administration had its capital. Although the Weiyang Palace was sacked the previous year during the overthrow of Wang Mang, the rest of the city is in workable shape. Once reaching Chang'an, the Gangxi emperor decides to strip the titles of the very chieftains who helped him gain the throne, and sends them away from the capital. This is a highly questionable move to make so early on after taking power, as most of these chieftains still have a significant number of troops that are loyal to them. Quote, "These short-sighted and self-serving political maneuvers embittered the chieftains and made the emperor the victim of a single faction in power. He had lost the chance of controlling events by having 2 rival factions at the court, which were nonetheless united in their ambition to complete the conquest of China." Unquote. As time passes, the Gangxi emperor's control of the fertile and populous areas of the Great Plain slips further from his newly established grasp. In response, Liu Xiu has finally arrived with his army to quell any discontent among the populace. It is essential for the Gangxi emperor to regain control of this area if he wants to feed those that have remained loyal to him and extend his influence to the rest of China. Elsewhere, the Red Eyebrows rebel army is still hanging on and divides into 3 units, which ascend on Quanqing. Looking to the southwest, the Gangxi emperor sends his generals Li Bao and Lu Zhang to try and regain control of the Sichuan region, where the local warlord Gongsun Shu has taken control as a rebel leader. Gongsun Shu knows the terrain well, as he was stationed in the area as the governor of Daojiang under Wang Mang. Both generals are defeated by Gongsun, and he proclaims himself King of Shu. It seems that this Gongsun may be craftier than some of the other minor warlords, and more of an effort will be required to deal with him. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Tacfarinas was a Berber deserter of the Roman army from the province of Africa Proconsularis. Not much is known about his early life before leaving the Roman military. Once starting his rebellion, he succeeded in causing havoc for the Romans through raids and guerrilla warfare tactics at the head of his rebel army. Severe pressure was put on the regions in North Africa essential to grain production in the empire. Multiple Roman commanders were tasked with ending the revolt, but in the end, it took a spirited effort from Publius Cornelius Dolabella, along with aid coming from the Mauritanian client king to finally end the revolt. Strabo was a Greek geographer, philosopher, and historian who lived in the Roman Empire, specifically the Greek-speaking Asia Minor. Traveling widely, he gained a vast body of first-hand knowledge that would inspire his greatest works. He is best known for producing Geographica, which presented a descriptive history of people and places from different regions of the world known during his lifetime. He also produced the most detailed maps of the ancient world up to this date. In the Roman Empire, the Praetorian prefect Sejanus continues with his mission to move up the ladder of power in the empire. Livilla, the widow of the late Drusus, has found herself within Sejanus' grasp. In the past, he allegedly seduced her, convincing her that they were in love and that Drusus needed to be taken out. This year, Sejanus pounces on Tiberius's recent tendency to withdraw from political and public matters and attempts to marry Livilla. Surprisingly to him, Tiberius steps in and blocks the marriage due to Sejanus' lesser status compared to his daughter-in-law, following typical aristocratic social convention. Sejanus' bold actions do not end there. They are put on full display at the trial of the elderly Roman historian Cremitius Cordus. The accusations put forward on Cordus include writing positively about Brutus and Cassius as honorable men and praising them as the last true Romans, and hence indirectly condemning Augustus. The possible true motive behind the trial is that Cordus had done something to irk Sejanus somehow. The elderly historian begins to realize that he will not be getting any help from Tiberius, so he starves himself to death. All of his books and writings are burned in the aftermath of this affair, but Tiberius at this point no longer cares. He is completely disaffected with the tumult and friction that comes with politics, and dreams of withdrawing from that role completely in his elder years, being now 66 years of age. Moving to China, where after splitting up the previous year, the Red Eyebrows rebels, still the most dangerous rebel force, now unite on the Yellow River Plateau and begin their march towards the capital of Chang'an in the west. On the way, influenced by the gentry and their contingent, they decide to declare their own emperor in order to legitimize themselves. They have 3 members of the Liu clan in their possession who they have kidnapped, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a rebel peasant army. Thus, they lack the experience and knowledge required to organize their own government, as most of its partisans are illiterate. In the end, they settle on a candidate, a young boy named Liu Penzi. Checking in on the Gangxi Emperor now. This year, he eliminates a young man who he sees as a threat to his rule. Back in 6 AD, when Emperor Ping died, Wang Mang placed a 2-year-old child on the throne who took the regnal name of Ru Ziying. In 9 AD, Wang Mang swept him aside and took the title of emperor for himself. But what happened to that boy? Wang Mang decided not to have him killed, and in the time since, not much is known about his personal affairs, but he did revert back to his personal name of Liu Ying. This year, 2 men named Wei Xiao and Gong Lin begin a rebellion in Linjing, where Liu Ying resides. Thousands of rebels rise up, and they take Liu Ying prisoner. The Gangxi Emperor responds by sending his Prime Minister Li Song to attack them. They wipe out the rebel force and kill Liu Ying in the process, who dies at the age of 20. Back at the capital, things are looking desperate for the Gangxi Emperor. He's already lost the support of many of the most powerful chieftains, whose loyal troops would have been essential in this situation. Last year, he decided to strip these chieftains of their ranks and dismiss them. The Red Eyebrows are headed straight towards the capital, and surprisingly, another unexpected force is doing the same. The Gangxi Emperor dispatched Liu Xiu at the head of an imperial army last year to pacify the Great Plain region adjacent to the Yellow River. Liu Xiu was successful and crushed the rebel leader and astrologer Wang Long. The emperor still does not fully trust Liu Xiu, who he suspects still resents him for the death of his brother Liu Yan, and orders the commander to disband his army and send it back to the capital. Liu Xiu sees the writing on the wall, with the prominent chieftains turning on the emperor, and the Red Eyebrows headed their way, so he begins his own march to Chang'an to take advantage of the situation. The first group to enter Chang'an are the chieftains. The mayhem lasts for months as they rampage through the capital. These chieftains then flee to join the Red Eyebrows rebels. In October, the Red Eyebrows finally enter the capital. The Gangxi Emperor is able to escape on horseback, but he is captured by one of his former officials and brought back to Chang'an. He is forced to abdicate, and Liu Penzi, the chosen candidate of the Red Eyebrows, is granted the title of king. The former Gangxi Emperor is taken out to the countryside, where he is strangled to death. The Red Eyebrows remain in the city, sacking the place and terrorizing the populace. But there's another contender to take up the mantle of Emperor of China, who is much more capable than the Gangxi Emperor was. Liu Xiu had left with his army from Chang'an after the start of the mayhem and moved to consolidate his power in the northeast. By November, he accepts the surrender of Luoyang, the second largest city in China. He enters and makes it his capital. He is now known as Emperor Guangwu of Han, in opposition to Liu Penzi, the boy propped up as king by the Red Eyebrows in Chang'an. With Emperor Guangwu at the head of the Hans, a significantly more capable man than his predecessor, his ascension officially marks the restoration of the Han dynasty, but he has much more work to do to pacify the entirety of China. Catching up with other ongoing rebellions across China, we turn to the southwest in Sichuan. Gongsun Shu declared himself the king of Shu the previous year, after crushing an imperial force led by 2 generals sent to take him down. He raises the stakes this year, as he now grants himself another promotion, styling himself as Emperor of Changjia. Emperor Guangwu recognizes the capabilities of this rising warlord, and realizes he needs to sweep up the other minor revolts before he can concentrate all of his attention on this more major opponent. We kick off the year with the Praetorian prefect Sejanus going on the offensive against the nobility of Rome. According to Tacitus, he sets his sights on Agrippina the Elder, the widow of Germanicus, and the mother of the 2 adolescent heirs to the empire. He sends agents under the guise of friendship with warnings that poison is being prepared for her, and that she ought to avoid interacting with her father-in-law, Emperor Tiberius. Her resulting erratic behavior causes Tiberius to believe that she is going mad. At this point, Tiberius departs the capital of Rome on a trip to Campania in the countryside to dedicate temples to Jupiter and Augustus. His final destination, though, is to the island of Capri, where he plans on leaving his imperial duties behind almost entirely and residing in his splendid villa. However, he does not officially abdicate his position of emperor. Rome, in the meantime, is left in the grip of the commander of the Praetorian Guard, Lucius Aelius Sejanus. With Tiberius going completely into solitude, Sejanus is now free to pursue whichever endeavors he desires in his pursuit for more and more power. Emperor Tiberius's only remaining path to correspondence with Rome is through Sejanus, who benefits immensely from controlling almost all of the information that comes and goes from Capri. Does Tiberius ever plan on returning, or does he feel comfortable allowing Sejanus to head the empire for the remainder of his life? His tendency to view Sejanus in a positive light may come back to bite him. To the east, an uprising led by Thracian tribesmen breaks out. The kingdom of Thrace is ruled by the Sapian tribe, who have been loyal to Rome for decades, which the rebels are disgusted by. Thracian people have been residing in the area for thousands of years by this point, being a constant thorn in the side of the Greeks and Romans. Tacitus describes the rebelling tribesmen as unusually fierce due to their hard lives residing in mountainous terrain. Quote, "The rebellion had its origin in their scornful refusal to endure levies and to supply our armies with their bravest men. Even native princes they would obey only according to their caprice, and if they sent aid, they used to appoint their own leaders and fight only against their neighbors. A rumor had then spread itself among them that dispersed and mingled with other tribes, they were to be dragged away to distant countries." Unquote. Poppaeus Sabinus, who is currently the governor of the combined provinces of Moesia, Achaia, and Macedonia, is tasked with taking down these wily opponents. Sabinus advances on the tribesmen with his army along with reinforcements from the king of Thrace, Romana-Talkes II. He forces the first small wave to scatter and sets up camp. They eventually meet up with the main force, and Sabinus sends forth his archers, who pepper the rebels thoroughly without losing a man. The Romans send out a sortie and cause the tribesmen to flee. Sabinus now advances on the enemy's main force and sets up camp once again. The Thracian tribesmen send out 2 detachments, one against the Romans and one against the forces of King Romana-Talkes II, who have been plundering the surrounding area. The Romans easily repulse this attack, but the allied Thracians are distracted elsewhere, looting the area. They get too complacent, and at night they are set upon by an ambush of the rebel tribesmen. The Roman loyalists are massacred and mocked for betraying their people and doing the bidding of a foreign empire. Sabinus immediately marches against the Thracian tribesmen and sets siege on them where they are fortified. He cuts off their food and water supply, which eventually leads most of them to surrender. The remaining headstrong rebels attempt one last assault to dislodge the besieging Romans, but it fails, and they are forced to surrender. Briefly moving south to Judea, where a new prefect is appointed to govern the province on behalf of the Roman Empire. His name is Pontius Pilate, and he comes to Judea at a time where earth-shattering events are on the horizon. The Red Eyebrows, who at one time were the most dangerous rebel force in China, have been occupying Chang'an since they entered the ransacked city the previous year, and are falling on hard times. By March this year, they have consumed the majority of the supplies from the surrounding area, and are forced to venture out further to find anything they can. They loot the imperial tombs and make their way westward to the sparsely populated area north of the Wei River. Once arriving, the worn-out contingent is crushed by a local warlord named Wei Ao, and then further decimated by early frost and snowstorms while they are licking their wounds. Those that remain are forced to limp back to famine-struck Chang'an, while Emperor Guangwu of Han consolidates his rule from Luoyang. Moving now to Korea, where the kingdom of Goguryeo looks to expand their borders yet again. Their king Daemusin of Goguryeo continues his effort to advance the importance of his kingdom, and annexes the minor states of Gaima and Guda to the south. His ambitions don't look to be ending here, but with a resurgent Han dynasty on his border, he may have to consider that threat in the future. This year, in the Roman Empire, a catastrophic disaster strikes onlookers of the gladiatorial games in Fidenae. The amphitheater in which these games take place was not built with a solid foundation to frame the wooden superstructure with beams of sufficient strength. The dazzling spectacle attracts 20,000 to 50,000 people as spectators, although the numbers are disputed. Tacitus reports, quote, "The building was densely crowded, then came a violent shock, as it fell inwards or spread outwards, precipitating and burying an immense multitude which was intently gazing on the show or standing round. Those who were crushed to death in the first moment of the accident had at least under such dreadful circumstances the advantage of escaping torture. More to be pitied were they who with limbs torn from them still retained life, while they recognized their wives and children by seeing them during the day and by hearing in the night their screams and groans. Soon, all the neighbors in their excitement at the report were bewailing brothers, kinsmen, or parents." Unquote. This is the largest disaster of its kind in history, and in the aftermath, the man behind the construction of this amphitheater, known only as Attilius, is banished. But the bad luck for the Romans does not stop there. A large fire breaks out on the Celian Hill, one of the famous 7 hills of Rome. Emperor Tiberius responds by sending out messages which declare for the distribution of funds in proportion to the losses sustained, which the populace applauds. Tiberius also declares that he wishes his retirement not to be disturbed. Sejanus receives the message with glee, knowing he no longer has to conceal his machinations against Agrippina the Elder and her sons. Sejanus doesn't waste his time and resumes the persecution of his opponents. He continues his demonization of Agrippina the Elder by serving her associates with corruption trials, accusing them of treason. Agrippina the Elder, the widow of Germanicus and opponent to Sejanus, is seeing herself increasingly isolated without Emperor Tiberius present. This year, she is placed under house arrest in her suburban villa outside Herculaneum. Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, has gotten himself into quite the situation. A woman named Herodias has caught his eye on his recent trip to Rome to meet with Sejanus. Now there are several problems with this. First being that Herodias is his niece. Second is that she is already married to one of his half-brothers, Herod Philip. And third is that Herod Antipas is a married man himself. Despite these glaring issues, he pushes forward and divorces his wife to marry Herodias, who returns his affection. He marries her, breaching Jewish scriptural law which forbids a man from marrying his brother's wife while said brother is still alive. Herod Antipas is viewed as a quite capable leader, so these actions are out of character. Herod Antipas's current wife, Phasaelis, is a Nabatean princess, and once she hears about his intentions, she flees to her father's court. The insult perpetrated by pushing her aside does not go unnoticed by her father, King Aretas IV Philopatris of Nabatea, seeing it as a breach of their agreement and grounds for a declaration of war. Emperor Tiberius normally would not want to see a conflict between two client states of Rome, but Herod Antipas's mother was a friend of members of the imperial family, so he holds more sway, and Tiberius allows the divorce to go through. Thus, a war begins between Herod Antipas and the kingdom of Nabatea. Nabatea is a kingdom composed of mainly Bedouin Arab people who have settled in the region and was established in the 3rd century BC. They control many of the trade routes in the region and have accumulated a sufficient amount of wealth. They are believed to have been the people responsible for building the magnificent Petra in the early years after their establishment. This year in China, Emperor Guangwu of Han continues to make consolidations in the newly restored Han dynasty. He orders a search for the former heirs of the previous iteration of the Han dynasty before Wang Mong's usurpation to re-establish the hierarchy which was present under their rule. This takes place as rebels still control the former capital. The extremely weary Red Eyebrows rebels leave their city of Chang'an once again this year, after venturing out for much-needed supplies the previous year and being utterly decimated by a local warlord. This time, they attempt to move northeast to the Great Plain, a much more fertile area with abundantly more resources. On their way, they are intercepted in a pass by the army of Emperor Guangwu of Han, and in turn, meekly surrender. The feared Red Eyebrows, who banded together in 18 AD for the first time, have been the most feared and mighty peasant army in this era of Chinese history, contributed to the downfall of the Qin dynasty, and took control of Chang'an, and are now no more. Emperor Guangwu can rest on his laurels for the time being, but there is still great discontent brewing across China, and quickly, further uprisings in the northern plain begin to pop up as the year ends. Starting the year off in the northwest, where the Roman border regions are seeing unrest once again. When Germanicus's father, Nero Claudius Drusus, was in command of the region in 12 BC, he marched his army through the territory of the Frisians, or Frisia, and imposed taxation on them. The Frisians are a tribal people inhabiting the marshlands of the northwest of continental Europe, a sometimes unforgiving environment. A later governor raised their requirements and exacted payment, at first decimating the herds of the Frisians, then confiscating their land, and finally taking their wives and children into bondage. This year, the Frisians have had enough. They hang the Roman soldiers collecting their taxes and force the governor to flee to a Roman fort, which they then besiege. The Roman propraetor of Germania Inferior, Lucius Apronius, raises the siege and sets upon the Frisians. Their armies meet at the Battle of Baduhena Wood, but the Frisians secure the victory after inflicting heavy losses on the Romans. Apronius refrains from seeking vengeance or burying the fallen soldiers and decides to leave the matter with the Frisians closed, greatly increasing their prestige with the Germanic tribes across the Rhine. Last year, we saw the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, Herod Antipas, pushing his Nabatean princess wife to the side and marrying his niece and sister-in-law Herodias, resulting in a war with Nabatea. We mentioned how the action of marrying his brother's wife while he is still alive is forbidden by Jewish scriptural law. Not only does he have to worry about the threat of the Nabatean army on his borders, but in his own territory, he faces backlash from the religious fanatics residing in his land. A particularly zealous Jew by the name of John has been speaking out against Herod Antipas in the territory of Perea along the banks of the Jordan River. Quote, John was regarded by many of his contemporaries as the reincarnation of the great prophet Elijah, who had purportedly ascended to heaven in a flaming chariot from the banks of the Jordan 9 centuries earlier, vowing someday to return. Unquote. John's devotion to his religion reportedly sees him dressing in a rough coat of camel's hair and subsisting on a diet of locusts and wild honey. From the perspective of Herod Antipas, this dissident is nothing more than a particularly vocal member of the extremely pious religious sect, the Essenes. The Essenes typically adopt a communal lifestyle, sharing their food and possessions among themselves according to their needs. They live a highly disciplined life, rising each morning before the sunrise to recite their ancient prayers and work silently in their profession. Given their suspicion towards women and their perceived lascivious nature, most of the Essenes are men. At this point in time, there are thousands of members of the Essenes residing in Judea, Galilee, and Perea. Their variety of Judaism, which is not a monolithic religion, preaches against the traditional Jewish practice of animal sacrifice and refuses to work on the Sabbath, the Jewish holy day. Their views on the physical world and afterlife can be summarized as, quote, bodies are corruptible, and that the matter they are made of is not permanent, but that the souls are immortal and continue forever, and that, when they are set free from the bonds of the flesh, they then are released from a long bondage, rejoice, and mount upward. Unquote. It is worth considering that their concern with otherworldly matters renders them unobjectionable to political authorities. The view of the Essenes is that Herod Antipas and members of other Jewish sects, such as the Sadducees, will all be swept away in the cataclysm that is fast approaching. Now John specifically has been preaching the importance of baptism as a purification ritual and a physical reflection of the cleansing of the human soul. He has made this issue the central focal point of his ministry and believes that the rite of baptism is an essential prerequisite for God's forgiveness, and that it signals one's acceptance into the kingdom of God. John separates himself from others of his kind with his willingness to spread his message to anyone as long as they repent their sins, even the hated tax collectors who work on behalf of the Romans, as long as they change their lifestyle after their baptism. John is asked frequently by his followers whether he is, quote, the Messiah, the chosen one, the deliverer of Israel, whose coming was foretold by the scriptures, unquote. And each time, he replies that he is not. The feared Xiongnu to the north of the Han Dynasty decide to capitalize on the chaos China has been experiencing for the past years and to go on the attack. Emperor Guangwu of Han is able to defeat the army they send in. This won't be the last raid though. It seems the Xiongnu have been keen to continue their pillaging of Han territory through this period of instability. They may have to face the fact that with China in the capable hands of Emperor Guangwu, a resurgence seems to be on the horizon. The Han Dynasty does not only take military action against the Xiongnu this year, but also in the northeast, they invade the territory of the kingdom of Goguryeo. King Daimusin of Goguryeo begins to rally his army to counter the attack as the year ends. Let's pick up where we left off the previous year amid the ongoing feud between Sejanus and Agrippina the Elder, who was previously placed under house arrest. Another roadblock standing in the way of the tyrannical Praetorian prefect Sejanus is eliminated this year. Livia, the mother of Tiberius, passes away at the age of 87 years old. Tacitus reports a letter being sent to the Senate from Tiberius denouncing Agrippina the Elder for her arrogance and prideful attitude, and her son, Nero Julius Caesar, for engaging in shameful sexual activities. The Senate does not begin these highly unpopular prosecutions against her or her son until it receives clear instructions from Emperor Tiberius to do so. Despite public outcry, Agrippina and Nero are declared public enemies. Both of them are exiled, Nero Julius Caesar to the island of Pontia and Agrippina to the island of Pandataria, the same place her mother, Julia the Elder, was exiled to by Emperor Augustus. In the past year, John the Baptist's ministry has become quite successful. Along with his denouncing of Herod's marriage to Herodias, Herod Antipas begins to realize he may have cause for concern with this zealous preacher. Tensions in Herod's territory seem to be rising in the past years, stemming from the previously mentioned matters, along with ongoing criticisms of the Hellenization of his lifestyle, and Pontius Pilate having multiple confrontations with religious zealots since coming into his role as prefect of Judea. Now, Jews from across the land have been hearing about the ministry of John and have journeyed from far to seek his confirmation of God's forgiveness for their sins. Also, in approximately this year, a man from Galilee, close to his 30s in age, named Jesus, makes another step into prominence and desires to be baptized by John. According to local sources, when this Jesus comes to be baptized by John, he feels the heavens open to him, and sees a blinding light, and senses a Holy Spirit descending upon him. He is said to have heard the voice of God saying, quote, "You are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased," unquote. Jesus is then said to have retreated into the desert for some time, in which he fasted and prayed for divine guidance and rejected sinister temptations. In the meantime, John continues his ministry and preaching against political officials in the region. Eventually, the resentment he has been provoking within the political class catches up to him, and he is arrested on the order of Herod Antipas. In the aftermath of the arrest, Jesus returns to Galilee and begins his own ministry. Quote, "His preaching focused on one central and overriding theme, that the kingdom of God on earth, long foretold by the prophets of Israel, was dawning at last, and Jesus himself had been chosen by God to proclaim the apocalyptic gospel and lead the way toward the path of salvation," unquote. Jesus tells the growing crowds who are beginning to passionately follow his teachings, quote, "The time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand," unquote, and, quote, "Repent and believe the good news," unquote. He denounces worldly possessions and calls to his followers to give all that they own to the poor, which causes a significant portion of his audiences to reject his message. He uses the method of conveying his teachings in parables, which are a simple story used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. His good word attracts his first 4 devout followers, 2 sets of brothers, Simon and Andrew, and James and John. As time passes, even more puzzling rumors begin to swirl, claiming that Jesus is capable of performing miracles. It is said that he turned the water into wine at a wedding at Cana in Galilee as a sign of his divinity, when his mother Mary noticed that the wine had run out. It would seem as if this mysterious and enigmatic man will have a big part to play in the coming events. The rebel warlords in China continue to fall like dominoes. Emperor Guangwu of Han finally puts down the rest of the minor uprisings in the North Plain, which were sparked in the aftermath of the surrender of the Red Eyebrows rebels. The pretender to the throne, Liu Yong's son and heir, Liu Yu, is defeated by Han forces and killed. Elsewhere, the Emperor's army does not even need to get their hands dirty. The pretender, Pang Qing's slaves assassinate him, ending his rebellion. Continuing with the Han invasion of the kingdom of Goguryeo that began last year, the events culminated in King Daimusin rallying his forces to defend his land. Daimyo sees success and turns back the Han army. The Han dynasty will have to reconcile with the fact that Goguryeo is capable of punching above its weight in military matters, and will have to turn their attention elsewhere for their imperialistic ambitions. Though, Emperor Guangwu should probably deal with the still ongoing revolts within his own borders first. We will see how his plan plays out in the future. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. Livia Drusilla was the wife of Tiberius Claudius Nero from 43 BC to 39 BC, wherein they had two sons, Tiberius himself and the beloved Nero Claudius Drusus. After divorcing Tiberius Claudius Nero, she immediately married Augustus, at the time still known as Octavian. When he was granted the title of Augustus in 27 BC, Livia effectively became the first empress, or Augusta, of the Roman Empire. In this role, she served as an influential confidant to her husband and cultivated an image of piety and virtue, serving as a model Roman matron. Livia continued to exert her influence on politics after the death of Emperor Augustus, when her son Tiberius inherited the title. She leaves the world behind at the age of 87, being one of the very last remaining individuals who had a strong memory of what Rome was like under the Republic. We will kick off this year with a literary work being published by the Roman historian Velleius Paterculus, describing the general history of the different states known to the Romans in this age. The name of this work is unknown, but it is referred to as Compendium of Roman History. The histories consist of 2 books detailing information concerning Roman history from the legendary aftermath of the Trojan War up to the current year. John the Baptist has been receiving information about Jesus from his supporters while still in prison. He is unsure of what to make of the teachings of Jesus, as he pictured the true Messiah to be a more fiery and violent figure. He has been kept in custody within the royal fortress of Machaerus. John sends messengers to Jesus, asking directly, quote, "Are you he who is to come, or shall we look for another?" unquote. In reply, Jesus tells the messengers, quote, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. And the poor have good news preached to them." Unquote. By now, rumors begin to swirl in the region, declaring that Jesus, who has returned to Capernaum as a base for his ministry, is able to heal those who are sick and accept his teachings. His 5th disciple, after Simon, Andrew, James, and John, is a despised tax collector named Levi, also known as Matthew, who then joins the movement as Jesus accepts him despite the revulsion that most Jews feel towards those in such a profession. This moment clearly demonstrates that Jesus will accept anyone who seeks salvation by accepting his message, no matter who they are. Later in the year, he has appointed 12 disciples, mirroring the 12 tribes of Israel, to help him preach and spread his message across the land. He has also accumulated a wider group of followers, which consists of many more women than is normal for Jewish religious movements. Jesus is the exception because he sees gender as an earthly distinction and no different than wealth, family, or politics. After the rumors of a miracle at the wedding at Cana the previous year, additional miracles are said to be performed this year, including healing of the sick and exorcisms. Jesus also preaches during his Sermon on the Mount, emphasizing inner transformation over external religiosity, urging followers to live by higher spiritual principles and trust in God's justice and grace. In a dialogue between Jesus and his disciples, Jesus supposedly asks, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" The disciples each give different answers. When he asks, "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus then declares, quote, "Blessed are you, Simon son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Cephas, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Unquote. This monumental honor for Peter signifies that he will play a foundational role in establishing the new church based on the teachings of Jesus. Kephas is an Aramaic word that translates to Petros in Greek or rock in English. Seeing these disciples spreading a message that does not conform to Herod Antipas's right to rule causes him to start to take a very keen interest in the matter. What he sees when he looks at these preachers is a rising tide of religious fundamentalism, instability, and disorder. He contemplates freeing his popular captive, John the Baptist, but decides against it after predicting the figure may ignite the flames of a massive revolt of religious fanatics against his rule. Herod determines he has no other choice but to move forward with his retribution against John for preaching against him and follows through with an order of execution. John's body is taken away from Machaerus by his followers and properly buried. The reaction of Jesus to this vile act is to grieve in solitude. At this point, he must be realizing the opposition and suffering that is coming his way if he continues down his current path. Will he move forward, or will he back down? Elsewhere, in Judea, religious tensions continue to mount as the prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate, orders the killing of several Jews in Jerusalem during a violent disturbance in the vicinity of the temple. Quote, "To Jesus, the incident provided a timely illustration of the futility of seeking change through political action without first experiencing a more critical transformation in the spiritual realm," unquote. Northwest of India, in the Bactrian territories, a new main player enters the scene. The Kushans come to prominence as a confederation of Yuezhi people residing in the area. The Yuezhi migrated to this region after being attacked by the Xiongnu in the 2nd century BC and were displaced from their former lands in the east. As their new leader, Kujula Kadphises ascends to the throne as the Devaputra, or emperor in their culture, at the head of 5 amalgamated Yuezhi principalities. The Kushans are able to annex the client kingdom of Merv from the Parthian Empire. The Kushan government consists of various tiers of control. Some areas are under the direct control of the emperor, and others under subordinate rulers who merely acknowledge Kushan paramountcy and pay tribute. Others recognize the suzerainty of the Kushan emperor, but are more or less autonomous. Moving east to China, where Emperor Guangwu of Han is still working towards his goal of pacifying all of China, which he's been battling with since taking the throne 5 years prior in 25 AD. Last year, we saw more rebellions coming to an end, and now it seems that there are only a handful of warlords holding out in the west, as Emperor Guangwu is in complete control of eastern China. Wei Xiao, the commander of the Xizhou region in the northwest, inexplicably begins to contemplate that now would be the best time to launch a rebellion of his own and declare his independence. Wei attempts to convince the governor of Liang province to join him, but his offer is rebuffed. Emperor Guangwu now sets his attention on the rebel warlord and self-proclaimed Emperor of Changjia, Gongsun Shu, who has been ruling his breakaway territory for 5 years. Wei Xiao sees Gongsun as a potential ally for future resistance and refuses Emperor Guangwu's orders to move south and attack. Emperor Guangwu prefers a peaceful resolution and repeatedly writes to Wei and Gongsun with humble terms, trying to get them to submit to him, promising them titles and honors. Wei continues to nominally submit, but act as an independent power, while Gongsun refuses any offers outright. Not being fooled by Wei's charade, Emperor Guangwu starts a campaign against him. Recognizing that there is no feasible way out of this predicament, Wei submits to Gongsun Shu in return for the title of Prince of Shuoning. We end the year with Wei Xiao's lands under severe pressure, with the imperial army closing in and other local commanders doing the emperor's bidding and launching attacks of their own. Now it's time for In Memoriam, where we look back on the lives of prominent figures who died in the year. John the Baptist was a prominent Jewish preacher and religious figure who lived in Roman-occupied Judea. He's often considered a prophetic figure, heralding the arrival of the Messiah and calling for repentance through baptism in the Jordan River. He emerged during a time of religious and social tension as many Jews longed for deliverance from Roman rule and sought spiritual renewal. John's message of repentance and moral reform attracted large crowds, including marginalized individuals. John's baptismal practice symbolized purification and readiness for the coming kingdom of God, marking him as a reformist within Judaism. He is notable for baptizing Jesus of Nazareth, but John's outspoken criticism of moral corruption, particularly of Herod Antipas's marriage to Herodias, led to his imprisonment and ultimately his execution. And that completes the history of the 3rd decade AD. If you're curious about what happens next, please like and subscribe to follow the series in the future.